Thank you all for joining this webinar. My name is Danica Harootian, and I'm a senior manager on our workforce programs team at the Partnership for Public Service. For those of you not familiar with the partnership, it is a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and a stronger democracy through policy ideas to make government work better, leadership development, workforce programming, and convening conversations like this one to help support the federal workforce. We are here to help support you as best as we can through resource sharing, providing plain language explainers, and continuing to do what has been the hallmark of the partnership, sharing the stories of the incredible work that federal employees do for the country. And we thank you for your service. With that, I'm going to make a few quick housekeeping notes, and then we'll dig into today's content. So throughout the webinar for 1 hour, we will answer questions that you submitted while registering. And you can also submit a question anonymously through the Q&A function, and we'll work to get through some of those as well. And though we may not be able to address every question that comes through today, we are continuing to hold these FedSupport webinars on a weekly basis to dig into additional topics. So while we may not get to a certain topic or question this time, please be on the lookout for more webinars in the coming weeks. And we will also be posting all of these webinar conversations on the FedSupport website for federal employees. Finally, while this discussion is geared for federal employees, it is an open forum and discussion, and we may have folks joining us from other communities. And before we go on, I'd like to introduce our guests who are joining us to help answer your questions. So I'll ask them both to briefly introduce themselves to kick us off. Julian, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Danica, and thank you to the partnership for convening this important discussion. I'm Julian Ha. I'm a managing partner with Heidrick and Struggles. We're a global executive search firm, as well as leadership advisory organization. I'm based here in our Washington, D.C. office, and I lead our firm's legal, government affairs, public policy, and trade association work. And I've had the privilege during my career of engaging with and helping place executives who've served at the highest levels of government and elective office. So delighted to be here.
Hi, thank you, Danica. My name is Doug Trout. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of DRiWaterstone Human Capital. We are a boutique executive search firm based in Washington, D.C. We've been around for 25 years. We operate primarily in the nonprofit sector. As an executive search firm, up and down the C-suite, all the way up to the Chief Executive Officer, throughout the important roles that have to be filled throughout nonprofits, associations, foundations, and higher education. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And we do some culture advisory on performance culture advisory services as well. So we're fully committed to this to the work that's being done throughout, and glad to be here.
Thank you both for those introductions and for your time this evening. We know that this topic has been of great interest to our audience in this webinar series, and we value your expertise. And before I forget, you may hear my colleague Mary from our government affairs team, who is joining us to help dig through the questions and keep us on track as well. So as a reminder for folks who continue to join, please use that Q&A feature here on Zoom for your questions as we continue on. So today's webinar, we want participants to walk away with an increased understanding of what employers are looking for and how you can make yourself stand out in your job search, thanks to the expertise from Julian and Doug. So to kick us off, for Julian and Doug, could you please speak about how candidates with federal experience are viewed by potential employers? what elements of their service are helpful to emphasize, and how are former feds especially marketable at this time?
Julian, why don't you
Oh,
start?
sure. I was going to say, being so polite here on, well, I'll take a first crack. Look, I think there are some real positives that people who've worked in the federal government should bear in mind as they embark on their next adventure, and some watchouts to be mindful of as they sort of frame their narrative. On the positives, I think candidates with federal experience, they bring a lot of unique, highly valuable and transferable skill sets to the private sector. They're regarded highly for their process discipline. They have experience, interpreting complex regulations, policies, protocols, especially in highly regulated industries such as defense, healthcare, energy, finance. I think that's a very transferable and valuable skill set. They've been trusted with sensitive information. So some have security clearances and have been, sort of very attuned to working and operating in these sensitive environments. They obviously have integrity and a public service kind of ethos, mission-driven nature to them. So those are real positives that, again, like I said, are transferable. Maybe just one watch out to be aware of is there is wrongly, I would say, a perception that federal employees maybe are used to a slower work environment, maybe a more bureaucratic kind of environment. So as someone coming from those environments, you need to sort of counterbalance that narrative with your examples of being innovative, pivoting, adaptable, collaborating with your colleagues. Doug, would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think it's really also important for various roles that you understand what networks you operate in, and how important those networks are going to be for the particular positions that may be of interest for you. When Julian and I get involved in searches, we spend a lot of time with the clients understanding in a very, very specific way what the key elements of the position and what the key factors are for the people that they want to see. And certainly for the person who's going to take that role, win that role, essentially, they're going to show that at the most exceptional level. And so I would just, the only thing I would add on to Julian is when you see these position overviews or position descriptions, don't tell yourself a story. What that position overview is telling you is the truth. It tends to be pretty specific in terms of the things that they're looking for. And so pay attention to that. Don't tell yourself a story that isn't necessarily there.
Thank
I
you
would
both.
I would
Go
just add
ahead.
one thing, and I think we'll get into this more with sort of tactical advice later on. But to Doug's point, if there is a position specification for a role that you might be interested in, there is absolutely no rule against having your resume tailored to that opportunity and have a different version, if you will, right? Because you want to make it as easy as possible for the reader to see why you're a perfect fit for that position. So you want to mirror the language that you're seeing before you, the answer key, if you will, in your resume to again, highlight or bubble up the things that show why you're a perfect correlation.
And clearly illustrate that evidence, right? Julian, show the experience. I mean, make it very, very clear from an evidence standpoint, from a success standpoint. And if you're struggling to say, I'm not sure I have this, or I'm not sure I have that, and you're coming down to the fifth item that they've listed, it may not be the right opportunity for you.
And then just one more point to add on to that. And again, I know we'll probably get into this more later on, Danica, which is when you have your resume for a private sector role, you must be very mindful to avoid government jargon and acronyms, right? Or at least define them. So instead of saying, oh, I was a GS 14 analyst at HHS, talk about you were a senior. You use terminology that is well understood in the private sector, right? You would want to say senior program analyst overseeing a $100 million health policy initiative, right? Because that will land well with an audience or a recruiter for a private sector position.
Yep.
Great. And I really like the term answer key that you use, Julian. I think that's really useful to think about, specifying each job application and materials there. I'm wondering if I could ask to expand on resumes for a moment, because I see a question already in the Q&A sharing, what would be your advice given that federal government style resumes are very detailed and lengthy and they're their own format? What is some high-level advice for work experience demonstrated in a non-federal resume?
Again, I mean, Doug, you may have a different point of view, but I would say I advise candidates who, have 10, 15, 20 years of experience not to shortchange themselves, right? They shouldn't feel like they have to compress everything into one page.
Yeah.
I know there are some people who say try to keep it to one page. I don't think that does right by them.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm not saying make it too long, because then it becomes sort of superfluous. But try to keep it within 2 or 2.5 pages, especially if you have things to talk about. But make sure that the narrative that you have with each position really does get to the heart of what you achieve. This is frankly a you document, not a we document, right?
Yeah.
This is a chance for you to highlight what you've achieved, what you've been most proud of, what you led, and give specifics, right, in terms of the teams that the size that you've led, the budget amounts, because those are things that certainly we look at on behalf of our clients, and I know our clients look at as well.
Yeah, the specifics thing was going to be my number one thing. The biggest flaw I see in resumes is there's not enough specifics. Sometimes it's numbers, sometimes it's just being overly general, and it doesn't really tell a story. It doesn't give me any sense, give me any idea of where you are. I'd add 2 other things. To the degree that you can show trajectory, I think that's really important. And that needs to be very clear that there's a trajectory here in your career in terms of what you've been doing. And then the other thing, this is probably geared more towards folks later in their career, which is, and this is getting to Julian's point a little bit too. I don't like resumes. I have too many people right now that are sending me resumes where it starts in 2012. And it's only giving me the last 15 years, and they graduated from college in 1991. I like to see, and you're doing something, but you spent the first 2 years doing orthodontic sales or something. I like seeing that. I kind of like to see where the beginning was. I didn't have that on there because I spent a year in Guatemala, on a banana farm. I love seeing that. So don't start your just if you've been working 30 years, I like seeing what the 30 years have looked like.
I would take even farther, Doug, and we sort of insist on it, because being thorough and being sort of transparent in terms of everything you've done, even if it's going way back when in terms of your first role, because that could be interesting, that could be relevant.
Yeah.
And it just makes it sort of paints a richer picture of you as a leader.
Right.
I am, however, sensitive to why people do that, right?
I am too.
Right. And I know that people who feel that maybe their runway is shorter than others, or that they wouldn't want to be canceled because they have too much experience. But the reality is it will have to be revealed anyway. So you might as well just own it.
Yeah.
And take credit for everything you've done.
Yeah.
Rather than forcing Doug and I to ask you the question.
Yeah.
And then it just, sort of takes up more time, frankly.
Yeah. And don't you think, Julian, it does bring up more questions than it does anything?
1,000%.
Yeah.
And we can figure it out because we'll have to verify your degree anyway. So
Right,
it's like,
right,
I
right,
just want to know up front,
right.
where did you start your career?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's younger people in their career on this. I have sons who are about to enter the workforce, so I'm particularly in tune to that right now. But
Yeah.
we don't need to see where you went to high school, but if you're still young enough where some of this work you did in college mattered and shows the story, shows the trajectory, shows your commitment to a sector or an industry. I interned with so and so starting after my sophomore year in college. Hey, that's part of the story, right, Julian?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
I just wanted to pop off the chat and say we're getting a number of questions about some of this, what you guys have been talking about with people worried about ageism and people who are later in their careers preparing to go through this. So I'd love to hear you guys elaborate a little bit more on how people should prepare for that, strategies for getting ready to deal with that. I think that's something people seem interested in.
I'm kind of brutally honest on this front. I think it exists. It sure as heck doesn't exist in my firm, but I think it exists, and I think it's worse for women than it is for men. There is nothing about that I like saying. And I think it just makes it even more important for folks later in their career to really be focused. And this is where I get a little bit personal. I take the personal piece of this. Julian heard me talk about this a couple of weeks ago, but I know I'm at a point in my life where it's not everything that's making me upset at the end of the night or on the weekend is not simply because of my job. There's usually something going on in your personal life where there's something that's not getting fulfilled on your personal life. And I always tell people, man, take an inventory right now of what's important to you personally as much it is professional. Because if you've got, like, let's say you want to live closer to your parents because you're dealing with aging parents and they live in Florida. Well, don't go take a job in New York City or in California, because now you're getting farther away from them. And you just pinpointed that your number one fulfillment issue or lack of fulfillment issues, you don't live closer to your parents or you don't get to see your parents enough. Please take that into consideration here. And then as it relates to the job stuff, you just have to be laser focused on what the opportunities are and making sure you have a good sense that it's a match and you are competitive based on your experience, based on your successes, because you do have something that a lot of people can't bring to the table, but it's got to be really, really focused and really aligned. And there are a lot of organizations that want and need that experience right now.
Yeah, I would agree with Doug wholeheartedly. And the reality is there are sometimes guidelines that clients will provide saying we would ideally like this candidate to be in this position for 10 years, right? And if someone has already had 35 years of work experience or 40 years, they may not be able to give another 10 years. But it's something we discuss with the candidates. We never rule them outright, but it's an honest conversation we have to have. The only place where it is very transparent is for board positions, right? Where there are certain listing rules where people have to step down when they hit a certain age. But that's really for folks who are already in their late 60s, early 70s, where that matters. But in other private sector roles, it's a discussion. But it could work the other way, right? Someone who's only had 10 years of experience and is applying for a position where there may be colleagues or people reporting into that role who've had more years of experience. So we have to be sensitive to understand why we would want to advocate someone who's not meeting the minimum years of experience because they're wiser than their years, or they've had more experience that's, sort of dog years of experience. But there are sometimes semi-valid reasons for those guidelines, I would say.
Julian, I don't know. You and I haven't talked about this. I don't like when job descriptions say X number of years of experience. it just, to me, sometimes it can work, but sometimes it works against the client. And I talk a lot with my clients about how important this magic number of years needs to be at doing things. I think at the very, very senior level, it does matter, but on some of these other positions, I'm not sure, 7, 8, 5, 12. We see so many different numbers now that need to be included in there. And I like to drill more into, okay, well, what is it about the years of experience that matter here? Is it because they've managed people for 5 years? Is it because they have 5 years of demonstrated experience in the growth sector? Do they need 10 years in clean energy? You know, let's be a little more specific about it.
I don't disagree. I think, sometimes what I try to tease out for my clients is, what is success, right? What would the successful placement leader achieve in his or her first, second, third year in the role? And if we can find analogous track records of candidates, even though they may not have had the requisite number of years of experience, then that's really what they're trying to solve for, right? Bringing someone who's been there, who's done that, who's achieved those things for another organization, and they can bring that skill set, that experience over to that organization. Sorry, Danica, we've gone completely rogue here.
Yeah.
No need to apologize. We're getting lots of great questions, and hopping between our approaching a job search, a career pivot, and also really tactical questions. So I did want to just note for all of these questions coming in as well that on our FedSupport website that we'll continue to put in the chat, we do now offer an asynchronous free career pivot boot camp. And that is content on our e-learning system, really supportive resources there, going step by step as we continue this conversation that I encourage you all to check out. And going back to something that Doug had shared about current personal values or priorities at this time in the middle of a job search, what are your recommendations for keeping perspective during a job search and ensuring that folks' current values during a time of change can remain central in a career transition?
Yeah, it's so hard. And I do. The first thing I say to people is you have to be good and kind to yourself. This is a weird time that's happening right now, and your kids will come give you an extra hug, and your best friend's going to tell you how awesome you are. But sometimes it's nice to hear from two guys on a webinar that you're a talented, good person, and you have to remind yourself of that. Let me give a quick exercise, just very quickly. And by the way, Danica, I want to say, I don't know if you guys can post, if you want to put my LinkedIn page on here. If anybody wants to reach out to me, if we don't get to your question, come, whatever, follow me friend me on LinkedIn and send a question. I'm happy to answer any additional questions or connect with people. But look, take a column, and some of you on this call may have heard this already. Take a piece of paper, an Excel spreadsheet, and create 2 columns. And on one side, write professional, and on one side, write personal, and then start dumping everything that's important to you on each side. And yes, there can be duplicates on each side. And please don't ignore money. If you need to make 200,000 or 800,000 or 60,000, whatever your number is, make sure you know where that is on your priority side. Dump as much stuff in there and then reduce it to 8. And then force rank the 8 on each side. The most important piece of this exercise is do not talk to anybody about this. Do not ask anybody for their opinion. They're just going to tell you how great you are. And this is about you and you being really honest with yourself about what's important to you right now. Then go sleep on it. Feel really good about the order of each of those columns, and then go talk to your most trusted person about it. Your spouse, your partner, your parents, best friend, whomever, and you're going to be amazed at how engaging and how sort of wonderful that conversation is. And it is going to immediately allow you to narrow your focus. And so you've got to take both the personal and the professional side in. And I am sorry for sounding too much like a psychiatrist, but that's the quick and dirty exercise that everybody can take and try out if you haven't done it already.
I think that's great advice, Doug. I might do that after this webinar. But I would say, if the question is trying to what are some recommendations for keeping that perspective? Then, first of all, treat your job search as a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. It's going to take a while. You may be lucky, but the reality is it will take a lot of kissing a lot of frogs and a lot of, at bats and whatnot. So that's one thing, and focus on the progress that you're making, right? Just celebrate some of the small wins that you might be having.
Yeah.
Getting your resume nailed down, making a new connection on LinkedIn, watching this webinar, right? These are all things, small things, but they're all helping you to reach that finish line and that end goal. You're going to get ghosted a lot, right? Don't take that personally. Doesn't mean you're not qualified. It could be for many reasons, right? The company may have decided to go a different direction. They may have an internal promotion. Maybe that organization was just looking to collect resumes. So it could be many reasons. You just can't take these things too personally. And then I would say, take some breaks, right? Because it is a marathon. It can be a full-time job. There's no built-in kind of validation or back padding on any of this. So you've got to pace yourself and take a break. Talk to people who've been there, right? This is a great time to reach out to your network and reconnect with your mentors and get advice from people who traveled that journey. And finally, look, all you need is one good offer, right? So there's going to be a lot of discussions, a lot of false starts. You don't need 5 offers. You don't need 8 offers. You just need the one that makes sense and fits. And so until then, just, stay open, stay rested, and just keep going. That's my motivational talk for this evening.
Yes, really helpful reminders all around there. I think compared to many of the previous webinars and our information on our FedSupport site, one question that I'd really like to pose to you both, and questions coming from the audience, is how do you translate public sector experience into a private role? At what level is the equivalency for what folks are looking for? And for this pivot, when should someone consider going with a recruiter and pursuing that support as well?
That's kind of a 2-part question.
Yes.
Let me tackle this. Julian, do you mind if I jump ahead?
Please go right ahead.
The answer to the first question is one of the most common questions I've been hearing lately. And I don't think I'm not sure it's a relevant question, because what I would say to public sector employees who are leaving or have been asked to leave, it's not as much trying to translate your work as it is translating the successes and the details of the work that you're in, so that it makes sense to the place where you're seeking employment, private sector, nonprofit, wherever it is. Your job really is to not worry about whether you think the employer is going to be able to parse your work. You have to parse it. You have to say, okay, I led a finance division within the federal government, and so I'm applying for a finance job with an association or in the private sector or with a nonprofit, and this is why this matches up. So you have to really do your homework on the position, evaluate how you've been doing your work in the federal government, and then tie that ribbon together. There was something, what was the second part of the question? Because I thought there was something good in there too, and I can't remember what you said.
Thank you. Yes, for a sector shift as well, when should someone consider going through recruitment firm or support?
Yeah. You know what? I don't know how Julian feels about this. I get these blind outreaches all the time from people, or Julian will send me an email from somebody and say, hey, this person is really great, and they didn't get a search, but I saw you're doing something and I think they'd be really great. But I like even the ones that come in blindly to me, and they said, somebody just reached out to me on LinkedIn the other day and said, I'm doing this and I'm trying to do this. Is there anything that do you have any positions that I would be a good fit for? That's where I cannot help you. Okay. I always sort of direct people to our website, say, if you see something we're doing, please let me know. And I do not like the ones that have clearly been sent to 10 people and are just, kind of, it's come through a system. But for people who say, hey, Doug, I saw you on a webinar. I'm really interested in getting into nonprofit work. I've attached my resume. I'm really interested in doing this. I'll hook you up into I'll get you uploaded. I'll get you hooked into our system. And if I see something there that could work, we're going to have a conversation. I never mind that. Sometimes we get inundated. I can't necessarily get back to you immediately, but I don't think and it's easier for me. So Julian and I work for two totally different kinds of firms, right? He is a global, gigantic, firm. I'm a boutique firm. There's 200, when Forbes ranks their search firms, they rank 200 of them. And it's everyone from Heidrick and Struggles to DRiWaterstone to single shingle shops in Des Moines, Iowa. So I think knowing who you're reaching out to also matters, and understanding what that firm specializes in as you think about it. Sorry, Julian, I went on too long there.
No, yeah, spot on. I'll just pick up from there. I mean, to your point, well, maybe just one foundational point, just so that everyone understands how to engage with folks like Doug and I. It's important to keep in mind that our clients are not candidates, right? We are not retained by talent to be your agent per se. So you should feel free to connect with as many Dougs and Julians as you would like to, or have time and energy for, because the reality is our clients are the foundations, are the academic institutions, are the private sector firms, the public, the private equity backed ones. They're the ones hiring Doug and I to help them identify a leader. So we're working on their behalf. That's our duty of care. Now, that being said, just like Doug, I receive a lot of invitations every day. Some are well researched. You can tell that they know what areas that I practice in, and therefore what opportunities I see, and therefore I can be helpful to them, and vice versa, hopefully. But just as you wouldn't go to a trust and estates lawyer for a labor matter, you shouldn't come to me if you're a supply chain executive, right? Yes, I have colleagues and partners who handle that.
Right.
People who are former CFOs, former CEOs even, they would be the right ones to connect with. So at least you've got to do a little bit of homework on your end to target the right executive search consultant, because only then will he or she be the right person to help you. Right. So that's my sort of addendum to the second question. If I could just get back to the first question in terms of how to perhaps translate or recast some of your government experience into the private sector. And I touched on this a little bit in my opening, I think, answers, but it is, again, extracting government jargon so that a private sector audience can understand the terminology and the impact, and just how large some of these projects that I'm sure you've all been involved with, so that the audience reading it can appreciate it. So the other thing to shift is sort of a mindset of having been a public servant to someone who creates value. In the private sector, that's really defined by bottom line, right? Or efficiency, or revenue, or customer satisfaction, risk reduction. Again, things you all do in the government, but it's framed differently and perceived differently. So instead of describing what you did, focus on how your results move the needle, and how they could how those same results-oriented skills can benefit the private sector organization that may, or not-for-profit that you may be talking to. So again, focus on those transferable strengths, those transferable skills, your deep subject matter expertise, your ability to handle crises, right, or change management situations. These are all things that are percolating every day in the non-government world as well. And then, yeah, I would just say those are some things I would keep top of mind.
Thank you. And thank you both for helping me with the two-part question there. So we touched on this in a prior conversation, and know that our attendees are across the country. What advice do you have for the current landscape in the greater DMV area as opposed to perhaps other regions in the US at this time?
Go ahead, Julian.
I think the answer depends greatly on, again, what is the individual's skill set, what is the position they're looking for. If they're, if they've been handling government contracts their whole career, that may be more limiting, right? But if they've been a subject matter expert in healthcare or finance or energy or tariffs or whatnot. These are things that could find opportunities around the country. I also read recently that a lot of federal workers or former federal workers are being targeted by state governments because they appreciate how they're ready to go, right? They've been doing this just in a different sort of a different construct, and they could slot very easily into the same agencies, the same organizations, but more at a state level rather than here in Washington.
Yeah,
Doug, would you agree or?
I 100% agree. We probably have a little bit of a specialized look in on it because of the nonprofit sector is particularly interested in it. As I'm sure the associations, and I would include associations in that, but and I grew up in Northern Virginia, so I feel like I've got a pretty good beat on things as well. But I think the exploration and the identification of, as Julian said earlier, your expertise, either your sector expertise, and probably thinking about some opportunities that you haven't thought about before. So let me give you an example. We do a lot of clean energy work. And obviously that part of the U.S. government, the Grid Deployment Office, a bunch of other offices at DOE and even in labor, et cetera, a lot of those positions have been eliminated. Well, there's still a lot of nonprofits right now and philanthropic foundations who need expertise from those areas because that's who's picking up the ball. And they need people who they can bring in because they know the you all who could come in and help these organizations are going to lend a new, more significant level of expertise to their organizations. And I'm just picking up a little bit on what Julian said about the state level. Same with the state level, whether it's state government, whether it's municipal government, whatever it happens to be. So I would say, and for those of you who are spilling out from USAID or from some other international development stuff where you'd be like, man, we've subsisted on government grants and bilateral agreements, et cetera. There are nonprofits out there who might be interested in talking to you because you could be helping them raise corporate or foundation money or leading their organizations or being part of their operations as well. So that is look, there's a lot of international aid organizations that are going down the tubes too because they've lost all their money as well. But some are still going to exist, and there might be parallel or tangential organizations that you can reach out to where there's interest there. I've seen it from board members, I've seen it from executive directors and CEOs. So I would not be afraid to explore some areas that you may not have thought about before.
That's great. And speaking of state government jobs, I also want to note on our website, we do have a career fair, virtual career fair hosted by the partnership on May 15th. And it is all for state government jobs across the country. So we invite you all attending this evening to check that out and attend as well. We've seen great enthusiasm from the agencies that are participating. A new question from the attendees for Doug and Julian, considering your roles, do you have any standout traits that make a candidate stand out? And do you have any further advice on getting for folks to get on the radar of those that are considering an executive role and working with folks like you?
I mean, I'll start with maybe just one strategy. You know, the way we solve our searches here at my firm is often sourcing, right? So we don't actually advertise our searches. We don't list them, often for confidentiality reasons or, you know, for being discreet. But the way we get to the right candidates is I call people that I trust and who I've known to be subject matter experts in the position or in the industry or both. And if I know it's not for them or they've declined, I will then ask them, who would you recommend, right? Who do you value highly and regard well in this field, or who do you see as being a good fit? And so I think, you know, my first bit of advice, if you get a call from Doug or I or others in the spaces that you operate in, take that call, because even if it's not for you, it could be for somebody that you've mentored, somebody that you've worked with, somebody in your network, and being helpful to us will pay a dividend, right? That's how you start developing a relationship with one of us. We'll then get to know you and understand what is the right thing that we should keep you in mind for, so that one day when that opportunity materializes, you'll get that first call. So it's sort of, you know, doing well by doing good, I guess. You know, being a source to folks like us and helping us get to the right answer will also leave a very positive impression in our minds. And so when the right opportunity comes, like I said, you'll get that early call next time.
Yeah, that's great counsel. The only thing I would add to that is, you know, Julian and I have to go identify and then recruit the best people for our clients, right? That's what, as he mentioned before, that's our responsibility. That's our contract. But at the same time, we're not trying to necessarily talk people into something. You know, we want to promote the benefits of a job and a career, but it really helps when we also get the sense that this makes a lot of sense to the person that we're talking to, and they're really excited about it, and they're a highly qualified candidate. We tend to know when somebody's just kind of walking through, you know, just kind of sleepwalking through it or faking it. And so I do think the attitude, your authenticity in your approach and how you communicate and how you convey your interests and how you convey your strengths does matter. I don't think there's necessarily any tricks in this, because, you know, when we get involved, we're talking to a lot of people, and we're in the disappointment business because we tell 9 out of 10 people they didn't get a job. But I do think it matters when we're seeing authentic enthusiasm and authentic participation across the line.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I have a next question addressing some current uncertainties. For folks who worked on topics or issues being targeted right now, such as DEIA programs or initiatives, how should they approach discussing their work and searching for similar roles in the broader market?
Oh, can I take this one first?
By all means.
Thank
I have a client. I have more than one client who's in this space. And I just got off a call with one of them today. And they were saying we gotta go head first into this. We gotta fight the fight. We gotta tackle this. And I'm going to use a term called being unafraid. I think the really focused organizations that are being attacked and scrutinized and unfairly treated right now are saying, hey, we're going to push back, and we need to get people here who are unafraid of this and who want to really tackle this. That's my experience with some of the clients that we have right now.
I think that's really encouraging to hear, Doug. I think, there's also, unfortunately, a reality that we've been experiencing where, clients feel they've had to pull back. But what we tell candidates and clients is that there's a real, it's really unfortunate getting back to where we were pre-George Floyd, right? Which is, through all those years, we have been making the point that diversity is a compelling business case, right? That was sort of taken for granted and assumed when we went through the DE&I journey of the past few years. Now we have to go back to those days and, again, remind clients and organizations that there is real strength and real benefit to having a diverse workforce, because they do bring perspectives that will matter to increase your bottom line, to drive revenue, to reach certain demographics that will help you increase profits, right? So it's going back to that original argument, which is always valid. We were able to pivot more towards the moral imperatives and the moral reasons, and now we're just sort of going back to the original business case.
Yeah, I just want to throw one more thing on top of that, because I think that's very important. Most of our clients have pulled back, to use Julian's term, on the visibility of their commitment or promotion to diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, I have not seen the actual practice or commitment from the individuals within those organizations change. I think they're just protecting themselves to the best that they can. And this isn't a good thing, but for those on this call that are seeking to still be with organizations who really believe, promote, I just think I think the individuals in those organizations are still there. I think the commitment is still there, but the visibility of it is not going to be. Now, I'm not talking about universities wiping out their diversity offices like that. That's happening. Those jobs just they don't exist anymore. But there are certainly organizations, I think, that as recently as 2 years ago, were way more vocal or visible, and it's either invisible or not as visible right now, but there's still a lot of internal charging that's going on.
It's really helpful and well said, and what we're seeing as well. Another question in terms of demonstrating experience and how to represent it in resumes, cover letters, and interviews and discussion is years of experience in the intelligence community or confidential work in federal government, how to represent that in their job applications.
I mean, when I come across folks with an IC or defense background, again, it speaks to that person's credibility, that they've been vetted, they've been trusted with secrets and clearance, and it's certainly worth highlighting that. but beyond that, it would really honestly depend, in my view, the position that they're targeting. Is it relevant? If so, how can they leverage that and get credit for years operating, sort of in that environment, or working out of skiffs or whatnot. But again, it's certainly a very positive credential to have, and gets you qualified for certain positions right away, I would think.
Yeah, you just have to assess the relevance of it for that particular job, and figure out, again, I'm going to use this ribbon. How much does the ribbon ultimately tie through all of it? And you've got to, it's not easy, but you got to figure that out.
Great. So as we are nearing the end of the hour, we wanted to get folks' input on sessions going forward before I ask a few final questions. We have already received a lot of great ideas about future sessions, and we wanted to take the time for attendees to use our Zoom poll function to answer 3 quick questions. The first is about how effective you feel this webinar has been. The second question is about how much you agree that you will take information from this webinar and apply it moving forward. And the third is asking for your input on future webinar topics. So that Zoom poll would have already appeared in your window, and your responses are anonymous and will be used to inform future sessions. So thank you for completing that. As we round out, I want to ask a few tactical next step questions for those that are attending this webinar and continuing on in their job search. What can folks have ready to go at this time, even if they have not left federal government yet? References, how should they approach a cover letter? Any next steps from today that you would recommend?
I think, to that point, Danica, certainly a resume, right? That's polished and no typos, please, right? That's very important. Have your partner read it, have your best friend read it, because when you're in that zone and that's all you're reading, you will inevitably miss something. Have a good LinkedIn profile, right? I would say from a social media standpoint, that is a must-have. It's something that recruiters like Doug and I will turn to. I would also say don't overdo it. Sometimes people put too much content on it, and then it sort of gets lost. It looks like you're just aggregating content without focusing on the day job. And then to your point about references, Danica, I think that is important to have, and it should be a dynamic list tailored to the opportunity. And one might say, oh, well, any reference I'm going to give is going to be a good one. Well, yes and no. When we call references, I look for certain things. How responsive is that person, right? It could be sometimes they're trying to impress us with a very big name, or a former member, or former, sort of governor, whatnot. That's great. If they don't get back to me after a week and a half of trying, that's just going to sort of counter, sort of backfire in some ways. But if it's somebody who is well known and can really speak to that person, having worked closely with them, attest to certain, confirm certain things, then that really goes a long way. So, we look out for how responsive are they, and how well do they know the candidate? Has the candidate prepared that reference? Have they talked to them about the opportunity? That shows they really, A, have a good connection with the reference, and B, they're so interested that they're trying to prep the reference to talk to us. So those are important things that I think people should bear in mind.
Yeah, I would say please tailor your cover letters to the role and to the organization to which you are applying. There's nothing worse in my mind than the sort of generic, unspecific cover letter. We do read cover letters, and I still think they're very important in our sector, in our industry. I want to double down what Julian said about the LinkedIn profiles. I am shocked when I see either incomplete or just bad LinkedIn profiles from people who otherwise shouldn't have them. It's as important these days as your resume. Don't you think, Julian? I think it is.
Absolutely. And the
Yeah.
photo, right, Doug? I mean,
The
again,
photo, I mean, everything about you should treat that with as much attention as you do your resume. I could not agree more with that. And I would just say, like, just also don't be a jerk. I mean, we tend to find out if you're a jerk or not. And in this day and age, nobody wants to work with jerks. And so I think you want to, have good relationships with people. Be a good person. Our clients want to hire good people. And I think that's really important. I know that may sound silly, but it can matter.
we to that point, we do employ another organization to do web, press, and social media checks on finalists or semifinalists, and that sometimes unearths interesting things that we need to have a conversation with about the candidate to hear their side of the story or to make sure there's nothing there. But that is all part and parcel of the diligence that folks like Doug and I have to do on candidates. So be careful what you post.
Absolutely. And all of those reminders in our day-to-day interactions with, info interviews, responsiveness and time, contact and posting and liking on LinkedIn. It's really important to be mindful of. And I want to thank you both for all of the advice you've shared today out of your busy schedules as well. I want to thank my colleague Mary, who's been helping navigate questions, and remind folks that the FedSupport.org website is in the chat for a lot of follow-up resources, including the eventual recording of today's webinar and past webinars as well. So please keep questions and suggested topics coming as our team continues this FedSupport series of webinars. And you'll find new resources, FAQs, and additional support for federal employees navigating change on FedSupport.org. And thank you again, Julian and Doug, for your time and expertise. And any last words to our audience for today?
I just want to thank you and wish everyone on this webinar the best of luck. And,
same here. Same here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stay strong.
Thank you for all the federal employees attending today. Thank you for the work you do each and every day, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.